So now we've got the machine assembled in the cradle. I'll just talk about a few features of the machine before we actually start doing any lifting. So as with all our vacuum lifters, the Clad Boy CB4 is battery operated. When it left our warehouse, the battery will have been fully charged, so when it arrives on site it should be suitable for a full day's use. If you look inside this main cabinet here, you'll see where the battery is located. You've also got vacuum pumps, you've got the battery charger, and you've got various other components. So other than curiosity, there's no real need for you to go inside this cabinet. And if you leave that closed and locked on the lever lock, it's a fairly watertight enclosure. So that's a good idea to leave that locked and upright. When you've used the machine for a day, you'll need to put the battery on charge. And the charging lead is in the cabinet on the side of the machine. It needs a standard 110 volt supply. And the back of the charging lead cabinet is also a small LED. And when it's connected to power, that will illuminate. If the battery is flat, it will show red, and it will gradually go through amber to green. Now, from a fully depleted battery, it normally takes 6 to 8 hours to recharge it, and for that reason, we recommend overnight charging. You can't overcharge the machine. The battery charger will sort of modulate and take what power it needs to recharge the battery. So you can leave the machine on charge overnight or even over the weekend, so don't worry about that. But just get into the routine of making sure you charge the battery after a full working session so that it's ready for use on the next session. A few other features about the actual machine. You've got a battery meter or a voltmeter on the side of the machine that will illuminate when you switch the machine on, and we'll talk about that shortly. You've got the main vacuum control lever. You slide that across into the green zone to operate suction, and you pull the pin and slide back into the red zone to release suction. On this side you've also got an acoustic sounder or warning siren, which we'll hear shortly. On the front of the machine you've got a vacuum gauge that will register when we switch the machine on. You've got red and green indicators, we'll talk about those shortly. On this side of the machine you've got the main power switch. In this case it's push for on and pull for off, but some machines may have a rotation switch on the side as well. And you've also got a water trap or a water accumulator here. So with Clad Boy machines you can lift wet panels. We just need to take sensible precautions to make sure the excess water is wiped away from where the suction pads will locate. But as you're working with wet panels or in wet conditions, you'll notice that water will accumulate in this trap. So at the end of a working session, when the machine is switched off, you need to drain that water out of the system. That's simply by unscrewing this little black plastic screw here, letting the water drain out, and then reinserting and tightening that screw. But please be very careful. That is a plastic screw in a brass housing. It's very easy to cross-thread it, so take care and don't over-tighten it. Just another word about the machine here, the specific suction pads that are designed for curve wall panels. Now normally with a Clad Boy, when we send it to site, we send spare seals for the suction pads, but that's not possible with these types of pads. So to change the seal, it's a factory operation. So there are no spare seals with this machine. For that reason, you take special care of these suction pads. And as I said earlier in the first video, make sure they don't touch anything other than the panel surface. And that's again a good reason why the machine should be left in the cradle like this when it's not in use. On top of the machine, for a horizontal panel lift, likely is that you'll get an adjustable lift eye like this. Now we'll set that as we think it's most appropriate, but you may need to adjust that for your panels on site. The idea of this lift eye is to move the lifting point further across to the panel, so the panel will hang better and it will be more convenient for when you put it onto the wall. If you need to adjust that, Neil will show you how to do that. Just take out the locking pin, unscrew the collar, pull the pin out, and now you've got in two pieces, and you can place the arm into the various slots. There are actually four positions you can mount this lift arm, and depends on the thickness and the weight of the panel which is most appropriate for you. So we'll set it how we think best. We'll just put it back into that position, reinsert the pin, screw the collar on, and lock that with the little clip there. Okay, so we're going to switch the machine on now, and the machine will make a few noises, and I'll go quiet for a few seconds, and then we'll talk about what the machine's doing and a few other bits and pieces. So this machine here, we're going to push for on. Okay, so what the machine was doing there, you heard the vacuum pump running and you heard the warning siren going as well. We'll talk about those in a few seconds. The important thing is when you switch the machine on at the beginning of the working session, leave it switched on for the whole working session. Don't switch it off and back on again between panel lifts, because that will waste the battery, because the machine will go through that cycle every time. So leave it switched on, and when you've lifted your last panel, switch it off. In this case, you'll pull this button, or on the conventional switches, you'll just rotate the switch to off, and then put the machine on charge. So now the machine's switched on. Around this side, you'll see that the battery meter is now registering, the voltmeter here. So the needle's gone up, and it's now sitting around about 12.5 volts. You can see that there, hopefully. Now, this particular Clad Boy is a 12-volt machine, so that meter will never show much above 12 to 13 volts if it's very, very healthy battery. Don't expect this needle to go beyond 13. It certainly will never go up the full scale of that voltmeter. And as you work the machine throughout the day, that needle will work its way down slightly, down to 12 volts, and sometimes slightly below 12 volts. But again, you should get a full working day out of the machine. And the other thing that happened when we switched it on, you'll notice the warning siren started and the red light was on. And that's until that continued until the vacuum pumps emptied these two vacuum tanks, small vacuum reserves here. And as soon as those were emptied and we got down to a trigger point, the red light and the siren went off and the green light came on. Okay, so that's switched on, ready for the day. Before we stop this video and move on to a lifting video, I need to point out that every machine comes to site with an instruction manual that's specific to the machine. That manual contains the CE and LOLA certificate. If that's removed from the manual, or the manual is removed from the machine, make sure that it's brought back with the machine. That should be kept with the machine at all times. The manual gives you a reference point, explains how to use the machine, basically goes over what I'm telling you now in some detail, but it also contains information about wind speed limits, which varies depending on what you're lifting, the size of the panel and the application. It also contains information about daily checklists and bits and pieces like that.